So I had one of you say that whenever Joe turns down the lights and hits the PowerPoint, that means he's getting serious. That's right. It's very serious, so you all pay attention. More than any other Sunday. No, I'm just kidding. But so back in late spring of this year through July of this year, we engaged what is the strategic planning process. And that's a very corporate-sounding word. But what really we're doing is we're trying to focus on who we are and where we're going. And part of that was to engage what was a cottage meeting process some of you participated in. We invited the entire community into that. We tried to have as many meetings as possible in a 2 to 3 month span. We also sent out electronic forms of specific questions that we wanted each of us to wrestle with. And now we have reflected on this data and feedback. We've printed out every piece of feedback for you to go over. And today we're going to present a little bit on your feedback. But strategic planning, like I said, is a really corporate-sounding word. And so what does that mean for us, First Lutheran Church? Strategic planning really is a very Lutheran word. It equals something called discernment, which again is figuring out who are we, and where are we going? All right? Discernment is what we're doing intentionally as a community. And discernment for what? Well, the answer is for God's mission. And to help frame what that means for us as a congregation, there's another great line by Dr. Rolf Jacobson that helps us think of it this way. God's church doesn't have a mission. God's mission has a church. And there's a subtle distinction there. We're not doing, our own agenda, right? We are part of God's greater mission, as we heard in the Abrahamic covenant today, read by Tansy in Genesis, to bless all families of the earth, to continue the work of God's good news in the world, to participate in that. So God's work of blessing all families of the world, that's God's mission. We as First Lutheran Church in Detroit Lakes, who are we in that powerful play? What's our line? What's our part in that powerful play? God's mission has First Lutheran Church. And we're going to discern, what does that mean? What part do we play? So our strategic planning is about discerning that calling, hence the biblical callings today, the calling of Joshua. Beautiful moment in Scripture that we read responsively. All right? Who is God calling First Lutheran Church of Detroit Lakes to be in God's mission, God's work in the world? Who is God calling us to be for that work? That's what strategic planning is. And now, we might ask the question, why now? Because on one hand, we should be doing that always, every day, as individuals, as families, as communities, as congregations. What is God calling us to be? But the reason we're thinking so intentionally about this now for First Lutheran is probably a number of reasons. But here are 3 important reasons to me as lead pastor. Number 1, you have recently full-time called pastors. Pastor Laurel and I were called in the summer of 2020, in the heart of COVID. So it's been a challenge to get to know you and to get to know this place. But after 2.5 years, I feel like we've made enough connections. We've come out of COVID. This is a good time to be intentional as recently called pastors, so to speak, to go, okay, who are we and where are we going? That's at least one reason we're doing this right now so intentionally. Number 2, renewal out of COVID and out of his recent historical congregational turmoil. You've gone through a lot in the last 5, 6, 7, maybe even some of your storytelling includes the last 12, 13 years. You've gone through a lot. But God has sustained you, you have sustained each other, and we rise to new life. And now with that blessing, what are we going to do with it? God sustains life, God creates new life, and here we are, First Lutheran Church. And we're not going to take that blessing for granted because a lot of organizations and a lot of congregations didn't rise again out of COVID. We did. What are we going to do with that blessing, and who are we going to be? And number 3, we cannot be naive to the changing religious landscape in our country, across the globe, and in our very community. Culture is changing. Religious connection and identification is changing. More now than in the last 30 years. And we cannot be naive to that. And it's not necessarily a terrible and hopeless thing either, and I'll get to more of that in a second. But in the last 30 years, fewer and fewer people are connecting to the Christian faith in America. The heyday of American Christendom, as sociologists would call it, was the 60s, 70s, and 80s, maybe a little bit into the 50s, coming out of World War II, where 70% of Americans claimed church membership, that they had a church home. Today, in 2022, that number is 47%. 47% of Americans claim church membership. All right? And that's for a whole host of different reasons. Now, how can First Lutheran rise to the occasion? How can we adapt, evolve? How can the Holy Spirit reform us to meet the moment? This is probably going to be painful. It's been painful watching the established church in America precipitously decline. All right? Maybe we deserve some of it. Maybe we haven't been doing things so well. Well, let's reflect, right? And now here's why I'm not hopeless. That's a huge decline in a matter of 30 years, but here's why I'm not hopeless. Contrary to popular belief, it is well documented by American historians, particularly by the name of Fink and Stark, who are the preeminent American historians of religion. It is well documented in 1776. You know what the percentage was of Americans that went to church at the start of our country? Now remember, 1960s, 50s, 70s, that's 70%, right? Today, 47%. In 1776, at the outset of this country, 17% of Americans in their newfound country claimed church membership. The reason I say that that's an important data set is because we are not in unknown territory as the church in America. The church has waned and waxed in American history for centuries. We don't have to panic, but maybe we've got to do some discernment about who we're going to be. All right? So that's why now. Now, who does the discerning? Well, the church in God's mission does the discerning. Well, who is the church? This is a line from our constitutional documents of the Lutheran faith, something called the Augsburg Confession. It was written 500 years ago, where they made definitions of basic things of the faith. And they said, here's what the church is. The Christian church is, properly speaking, nothing else than the assembly of all believers. In other words, who does the discerning? The church. Who's the church? It's a people. It's you and me. All right? Therefore, discernment of who we're going to be and who God is calling us to be requires all of us, the whole body. And to edit what we heard today a little bit, indeed, the body does not consist, from 1 Corinthians, of one member or just the pastors or just the staff or just your vision council, but many. We need the hive mind, the whole body, to discern who we're going to be. Hence the cottage meetings. That's why our first step in strategic planning and discernment was to get you all together, or at least give you the opportunity to get together. So the cottage meetings happened from April through July. All right? 107 of you participated. And here is what you had to say about yourselves. Remember there, for those of you who weren't able to participate, and for those of you who did, the questions that we grappled with were intentional. We asked, what are the strengths and weaknesses of this place? We asked things like, what's your greatest hope for this place and this people? So these are the documented feedback here, okay? The most perceived gaps. So these are, I'm going to list the top 10 of what you think and told yourselves are the greatest weaknesses or gaps of this place. Number 1. Named more than anything else in your answer to this question, we need a wider and more sustainable volunteer base. If we're going to be the church we want to be, if we're going to be the church we are now, we need more people to pull it off. Currently, right now, it's an unsustainable model. We need to widen that pool. That's the number 1 gap you all identified about yourselves. Number 2, we have low in-person attendance post-COVID. You know, sometimes some of you will regale me of stories of how the pews were full prior to COVID. And so I know that that's a sense of pain and a sense of urgency for some of you, a lot of you. At least when you came to this question, 13% of you, more than 1 out of 10 of you in answering this question go, this is our biggest problem. All right, number 3, more youth worship involvement. We need kids involved in worship more and more consistently. We need more family youth involvement after baptism and confirmation. You named as your number 4 gap. Number 5, we need more fellowship opportunities. Number 6, we need to be a friendlier, more inviting place. When you think of the top 10 gaps, that's your number 6 that you mentioned. Welcome, integrate new members more fully and more warmly. Number 8, we need more intergenerational opportunities. Number 9, we need more adult ed opportunities. Number 10, evangelize, promote FLC's story. Now, I appreciate all this feedback, and I think it is telling us something clear, and we'll get into that in a moment. But I just want to highlight number 10 for a second. Lutherans are notoriously challenged at evangelism. All right? Evangelism is sharing the good news of Jesus with other people. That's a hard thing to do, especially for a more introverted people. All right? But I think there's something really beautiful happening here at First Lutheran. You do a lot of stuff. You have busy and robust and thriving ministries. And I do wonder if we're not telling ourselves that story well enough. We need to tell each other of what God is up to in this place, and we need to tell our community better the radical and beautiful things that are already happening here. I think that's insightful. So now, here's the work of your Vision Council. Take all this feedback and go, okay, lots of specific answers. Now, what is the pattern? What are people agreeing upon? What are the themes that might be emerging? So we can start to clarify what to do with this data, right? That's the work the Vision Council has been doing over the last couple months. And now I'm going to show you an example of one thing we kind of are sensing as an emerging pattern. One theme becomes very apparent when you look at those top 10 gaps you just listed. I mean, they're different and distinct when we went through all 10, right? But really, 80% of those top 10 gaps, when we asked you all what could get better at this place, 80% of your answers had to do with yearning for more fellowship. 8 out of the top 10 perceived gaps could fall under the umbrella of saying, we need to do better to strengthen our relationships between one another. If I go back to them, for instance, number 2, low in-person attendance post-COVID, you want to be in each other's presences. That's giving you anxiety that you're not. We need more youth worship involvement. You want to be with your young people in the same space as them. Number 3, you want to continue the relationship with the baptized and the confirmed. Number 5, well, that's pretty explicit. You want fellowship with one another. Number 6, you want to be a warmer people so you have a better chance at more relationships. Number 7, more relationships. Number 8, more relationships. Number 9, more relationships. 8 of the top 10 gaps are you all yearning for fellowship. And that's what we're starting to identify. And we're trying to do that with all the data sets, all right? So, of course, we read every single one of your gaps that you listed. And that's why we printed out the feedback. There are more. That was just the top 10 in terms of commonly mentioned. All right, so check out that packet, bring it home with you, or if you're really bored at some point in today's service, go ahead and go through it. But do it in your free time too. Now, here are the most perceived strengths. Here's what we're proud of. Here's what we are good at. Here's what we need to invest in and keep. Number 1, most mentioned perceived strength, pastoral leadership. Hey-o, that's us. Thank you. No, I mean, that means more than you know, though. I'm being awkward, all right? Thank you, because it is not easy to take a call. It is not easy to uproot your family or wherever your career was in the moment and find a new place and establish pastoral leadership. It's a vulnerable thing to do that. I'm not asking you to pity us by any means, but I'm saying this to say your support matters and gives us life and sustainability. You don't always have to agree with us, but your love is so meaningful. Thank you. Number 2, you've named, very common naming of a greatest strength here are the youth and family ministries. Couldn't agree more. Number 3, the music ministries you see as a huge strength of this place. Couldn't agree more. Number 4, the office staff you've named as a powerful asset within this church body. Number 5, you've named your worship, that you have varieties, that you have options, and that it's quality worship. Those are your strengths that you've named in the top 5. Number 6, really interesting, a contradiction within your feedback. We need to be we are a friendly and welcoming place. And it's not a surprise, because I think you are friendly to each other. Sometimes there might be those who don't feel that friendliness. And it's not because you're going out of your way to be cold and mean, but This is a common contradiction in churches. People will say they're a very friendly place, and they are, but the width of that friendliness is not always felt. But this is a strength. You have this spiritual gift. You are a friendly and warm people. We got to widen it, all right? Number 7, service and outreach ministries. This is no doubt a top 10 strength of yours. I've had experience in about half a dozen different congregations. This is by far the most active congregation outside of its walls. You are a radical people in what you are able and committed to in your service outside the walls. Incredible, and you should list that as a valued strength. Number 8, it was listed very often that you are not taking for granted that you have a dynamic facility and location. Your central location has been very important to you for a long time, and your building is dynamic, and you named it as a strength and an asset. Number 9, preaching and sermons. 10 of you like our preaching. And 2 of those 10 were Pastor Laurel and me. No, thank you. That's nice of you to say that too as a top 10 strength. Just make sure you send that to our preaching professors. Okay, number 10 strength that you listed was lay leadership, council, and teams. Absolutely. You have a determined, I think too small of a group, and you're saying that about yourselves too, but you have a determined and quality core of lay leadership in this congregation. Whether it's leading the foundation or whether it's leading the council, the personnel team, stewardship team, women's groups, whatever, adult ed, you do have a determined and capable set of lay leadership. We just need to widen that base, all right? That is a strength here. So again, for more strengths that you all listed in the packet. Now, greatest hopes. We asked you, okay, this is what you're good at. This is what you feel you need to get better at. What do you hope? What do you want? What are you sensing as a hope within yourself? And we were asked for just one singular hope, but you're a very hopeful people. A lot of you gave some of your 3 favorite hopes or whatever. So, and here's how it broke down. Number 1, the number 1 most mentioned greatest hope of this place is you said about yourselves, you want to grow in numbers. You want to grow in attendance, membership, and involvement. And that makes sense that you would want that and list that commonly as the greatest hope because, again, in your perceived gaps, you wanted the volunteerism to widen, you want more involvement, and you want more fellowship. All right? So that's understandable. And your number 2 goes hand in hand with that. Your number 2 most mentioned greatest hope was that you basically become a more loving and welcoming and healthy place and people. That you want to grow in numbers, but you also want to grow in relationship, in health, in faith, right? And that continues into number 3. You have a very comprehensive top 5 here. You want to grow in love and service for the local community. Number 4 could be grouped in, you want to grow in faith and love for God or in your own faith and discipleship. Number 5, you want to grow in love and service beyond DL. I think these 5 greatest hopes really slide into one another. They're very comprehensive. They're kind of neat looking at all 5. First of all 5 listed the word grow in them, but you want to grow in population of First Lutheran Church, and then you want that population to be healthy and loving and welcoming, and then you want that population to serve your neighbor right next door here in DL, and all the while you want this relationship between God and us in this community to be strong, and then you want to go beyond DL. Like that's a really comprehensive flow chart of hopes there. All right, other notable hopes that you all named, general stability. 9 of you, when answering this question, said that's your greatest hope, which again, I think reveals some of the pain, some of the exhaustion of some of the turmoil you've experienced, that some of you as a greatest hope would say, we just want to no longer be in recovery mode. Continual investment in youth and children to be a place where all ages have a place, upgrade kitchen, and generate, maintain excitement were other notable greatest hopes. Now, again, check out the packet for the exhaustive list of hopes. Know that we, pastors and Vision Council, have read every single one of your answers, and we take each one of them deeply seriously, whether they were high volume or low volume. And one example I want to express there is only one of you said this, and only one of you said this one time, but it's a very powerful and insightful gap that you named. And it was the storefront. Somebody wrote in the feedback, they said, our storefront on Lake Avenue does not accurately reflect who we are. It looks cold and it looks sleepy. We don't want to be cold, we want to be warm and inviting. And we are a busy and thriving place. And maybe our storefront on Lake Avenue is not reflecting that accurately. I thought, wow, that's really insightful. That's good discernment, all right? So now what do? That's the feedback. That's how it's kind of fleshed out. That's how it's kind of consolidated and ranked out. Now what do? Well, we're still in the midst of discernment and strategic planning. The next steps are goal making. When we look at the top 10s, when we look at the things that you're saying about yourselves, and we start to categorize them and notice patterns, let's start to make goals based on that. And then let's make action plans. Let's chart a path to achieve that goal. Now, after multiple meetings and hours of reflection, your vision council and pastors have been able to basically funnel that whole packet and all those top 10s into what we think are 4 core goals. 4 core goals amongst this people. Number 1, that we continue to create accessible, relevant, and faithful worship to promote congregational and community engagement. You're proud of your worship is meaningful to you, and we need to keep it that way, and we need to keep creating it. It needs to be accessible, relevant, and faithful. Goal number 2, healthy support of pastoral leadership and staff to join them in the work of the church. From your feedback, it is clear that the pastors and the staff, that you want to invest in them, and we appreciate that. And importantly with this goal, as you think back to that number 1 gap, that we lack a wide base of volunteers and a deep base of volunteers, well, we need to join the staff in the work that they do. Because the staff and the pastors cannot be the only ones doing the work of the church. That's not a sustainable model. So that's a big goal for us. How do we widen and deepen the base of volunteers to join pastoral leadership and staff in the work of the church? Number 3, you're yearning, especially in the gaps, for real relationships, for authentic community. How do we grow in authentic relationships and discipleship? The goal is to grow in authentic relationships and discipleship through education, small group ministries, and fellowship opportunities. Because those 3 things were named often in the gaps or the strengths or the hopes. You want more small groups, you want more education, you want more relationships. Well, let's do it. Number 4, this was mentioned all over the place too, and we already highlighted it. A 4th core goal is provide a safe, healthy, and inviting facility to support the thriving of all the above. Worship, join and support pastoral leadership and staff, grow in community and discipleship and faith together, and have a building that we invest in and maintain that can sustain all the above. Now the work of your vision council continues. These goals might come under different language soon. We still have more work. We're going to continue to discernment, and these might evolve. But just for the sake of transparency and vulnerability here, I'm going to show you that, I continue to show you that we are a work in progress. This is unfinished product. But the next step is, okay, we've named our 4 core goals. At least we think we've basically named them. What are the steps to get there? Well, we're wrestling. Let's use an example. For creating and sustaining accessible and faithful worship, number 1 action step we should take, we pastors are going to remain committed to proclaiming the biblical story and Lutheran theological principles every single worship service, because it's who we are, and the biblical story and the Lutheran emphases matter. Number 2, we're going to continue to try to promote intergenerational worship participation, and we've already started to implement that stuff. Noisy offering, children's sermons, all-family communion, confirmation requirements that push the confirmands into different roles in worship, and maybe special worship services along the way. Another way we get to our goal number 1 is we need to assess, maintain, and invest in technology that makes our worship accessible to all. We learned deeply during COVID that our technology matters for proclaiming the gospel of Jesus Christ. COVID showed us that. And now we've got to assess and maintain the technology we have, if not invest in more, to continue to make it accessible to all worshipers, in-person, remote, hearing impaired, visually impaired, etc. All right, that's another action step. Another action step is those 2 guys up there running the sound booth, they represent a small bullpen for audiovisual support, but it's some of the most important worship participation that happens. So we've got to increase that bullpen, etc., right? Or continue to assess music options and choices to maximize the accessibility of worship and real connections to the gospel, all right? Now, I'm closing up here, but this is kind of an FYI. I, too, have discernment goals. As a pastor, every ministry I walk into, every context I walk into, I have core goals as a pastor. My constant pastoral goals are to cultivate 3 core biblical pillars of the Christian faith. Here's what they are: worship, fellowship, and learning. Why? Because those are the 3 pillars of the movement that Jesus created. He broke bread with his friends, he spoke and invested in the relationship with his friends, and he taught them the faith. We know that that model works. And so therefore, I'm trying to constantly cultivate those things. And the reason that I mention that is, you won't be able to read this, but your 4 emerging congregational goals are compatible with my pastoral goals. And I think that's pretty neat and powerful. So I'm just naming that there's alignment between our pastoral goals and your goals, and that's a good thing. With that, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your time throughout the summer and late spring. Continue to pray for your vision council and your pastors that's wrestling with this feedback, trying to do right and faithful by you and God and neighbor, as we continue to find the action steps to meet our goals. And hopefully there's a part 2 to this presentation that shows us the pathway to where we want to go. This is a profound moment in the history of FLC. Why? Because everything's different post-COVID. And we're going to figure out who we are and where God is calling us. And when we get all of you to buy in, we are going to go somewhere, folks. Amen.